American history is often carved in pristine, unyielding marble. We build monuments to our greatest leaders, memorize their speeches, and teach their triumphs to generations of children. But marble has a way of erasing the messy, painful, and deeply human realities of the past. For over a century and a half, the official story of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was a tale of frontier triumph. He was the self-taught rail splitter who rose from a log cabin in Kentucky to save the Union and eradicate the institution of slavery. But behind the towering legacy, Lincoln carried a suffocating, deeply buried secret. It was a truth so dangerous in 19th century America that it could have destroyed his political career, shattered his reputation, and altered the course of history. He took this secret to his grave, entrusting it to only one man. When modern geneticists finally attempted to decode this mystery in 2015, they didn't just uncover the truth about Lincoln's family tree, they unearthed a terrifying frontier disease, the brutal reality of 19th century morality laws, and an ancient genetic timestamp that proves the human story is far more complex than any history book ever admitted. The story begins on a dusty road in Illinois, roughly a decade before the outbreak of the American Civil War. Around 1850, Abraham Lincoln was riding in a buggy with his trusted law partner, William H. Herndon. As the carriage rolled toward the Menard County Courthouse, Lincoln's usually stoic demeanor shifted. He turned to his friend and confessed something that would haunt American historians for over a century. According to Herndon, Lincoln lowered his voice and said, "Billy, I'll tell you something, but keep it a secret while I live. My mother was a bastard." Lincoln believed that his brilliant analytical mind and his relentless ambition did not come from the humble Lincoln bloodline, but from an unknown, well-bred Virginia farmer who had an illicit affair with his grandmother. He then added a phrase that has echoed through history: "God bless my mother. All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to her." To understand why this confession was so explosive, you must understand the ruthless legal and social codes of 19th century America. If you were born outside of wedlock, the law classified you as filius nullius, nobody's child. You had no legal right to inherit property, no claim to a family name, and you carried a permanent, inescapable social stain. Unwed mothers were treated as criminals. They faced public humiliation, severe fines, and brutal public punishment. To survive, families systematically hid illegitimate children, raising them as cousins or nieces to dodge the crushing judgment of society. In the brutal, bare-knuckle arena of 19th century politics, illegitimacy was the ultimate ammunition. If Lincoln's political enemies had discovered his mother's true origins, they would have weaponized it instantly, attacking his morality and arguing he was unfit for public office. Herndon kept his promise. He remained silent while Lincoln lived, navigated the Civil War, and was tragically assassinated in 1865. But in 1889, 24 years after the president's death, Herndon published a biography that laid the secret bare. The revelation triggered an absolute firestorm. The Lincoln family, deeply protective of the late president's saintly image, was outraged. Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham's surviving son, furiously condemned the claim. For the next century, academics and historians split into warring factions. One camp, defending the family's honor, insisted that Lincoln's mother, Nancy Hanks, was entirely legitimate. They argued she was the daughter of a respectable widow named Lucy Shipley. The other camp pointed to a damning, physical piece of evidence buried in a Kentucky courthouse. Deep in the Mercer County archives, a yellowing document dated November 24, 1789, showed that a woman named Lucy Hanks had been indicted by a grand jury for moral misconduct. On the frontier, this charge almost universally meant an unmarried woman had given birth. Despite the paper trail, the debate raged on for over 100 years. The frontier records were simply too fragmented, too faded, and too contradictory to settle the argument definitively. To find the absolute truth, researchers realized they could not rely on 18th century paper. They had to look at the biological archive of the human body. In 2015, a dedicated team of genetic genealogists decided to tackle the mystery using mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is a unique genetic tool. Unlike the DNA in our chromosomes, which is a massive scrambled combination of all our ancestors, mitochondrial DNA is passed down exclusively from a mother to her children in an unbroken, virtually unchanged chain. There was one massive hurdle. Abraham Lincoln has no living descendants. The direct Lincoln line went completely extinct in 1985. But because mitochondrial DNA tracks the maternal line, researchers didn't need Lincoln's descendants. They needed the living descendants of the women on his mother's side of the family tree. The researchers spent years meticulously tracking down two distinct groups of living people. Group A consisted of the unbroken female line descendants of Lucy Hanks. Group B consisted of the descendants of the Shipley family, the respectable lineage that defenders claimed was Nancy's true origin. If the two groups shared the same DNA, the legitimate Shipley theory was true. If they didn't, Lincoln's heartbreaking buggy confession was a historical fact. When the lab in Houston ran the sequences, the results were striking. Group A matched perfectly, confirming the Hanks maternal line. Group B, the Shipley descendants, carried a completely different genetic signature. There was no biological connection between them. The Shipley theory collapsed. The science confirmed that Abraham Lincoln's mother came from the exact marginalized working-class frontier lineage that he had whispered about in that buggy. But as geneticists reviewed the sequencing data, they found something else, a genetic marker so rare and ancient that it stopped them cold. All humans can trace their maternal lineage back to Africa roughly 150,000 years ago. As humans migrated across the globe, random, harmless mutations created distinct genetic timestamps known as haplogroups. The vast majority of Americans with early colonial European ancestry carry very common haplogroups like H or J, which reflect standard British, Irish, or German origins. But the descendants of Lincoln's maternal line carried a haplogroup known as X1c. Haplogroup X1c is extraordinarily rare. It is primarily found in the Near East, North Africa, and regions surrounding the Mediterranean. Its highest concentrations today are found among the Druze populations of Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. But the most compelling part of this story isn't the ancient DNA. It is the flesh and blood woman who passed it down. Nancy Hanks was raised in the shadow of a society that deemed her legally non-existent. Yet, historical accounts describe her as an intelligent, deeply religious, and fiercely capable woman. While historians debate her exact level of formal literacy, it is widely documented that she possessed a rich oral tradition, telling stories to young Abraham and instilling in him a profound sense of empathy. Many scholars believe that Lincoln's ironclad moral compass and his foundational hatred of slavery was first seeded by a mother who knew exactly what it meant to be marginalized and treated as property by the laws of men. Tragically, her influence on him was cut violently short by one of the most terrifying unexplained horrors of the American frontier. In 1818, at their remote homestead in Indiana, a devastating outbreak of what pioneers called milk sickness swept through the community. To the settlers, it was a mysterious, invisible curse. Entire families would suddenly fall ill, slowly fading away over several days. Today, science knows exactly what caused it. In the dense, uncleared forests of the Midwest, an incredibly toxic plant called white snake root grew wild. When grazing cattle consumed the plant, the lethal toxin passed directly into their milk. When pioneer families drank the milk, they were unknowingly poisoning themselves. Nancy Hanks fell ill with the sickness. She suffered for days before passing away. Abraham Lincoln was only 9 years old. He and his father had to build her wooden coffin themselves, burying her on a quiet hillside. When you look at the totality of Abraham Lincoln's life, the mystery of his bloodline fades behind the magnitude of his endurance. He had less than 18 months of formal schooling. His family possessed no wealth. He grew up knowing that the society he lived in had criminalized his grandmother and stigmatized his mother. He carried the heavy psychological burden of illegitimacy in a political era that would have gladly used it to destroy him. Yet he rose above all of it. He held a fractured nation together through its bloodiest and most devastating war. He dismantled an institution that had existed in America for over 2 centuries. He penned words that still define the ultimate promise of human equality. Modern science didn't expose a scandal. It illuminated a triumph. The DNA in the Hanks bloodline proves that the systems of shame and stigma that society builds are ultimately powerless against the sheer force of human will. Lincoln was not a great man because he possessed pure aristocratic bloodlines. He was a great man because he proved that greatness can emerge from the absolute lowest, most forgotten corners of the world. When he told his law partner, "All that I am or ever hope to be I owe to her," he wasn't speaking about genetics. He was speaking about a mother's resilience.